So we have a listener question for you guys. If we look to Jesus' example, is there a difference between how he was making disciples and making apostles? Is there a difference in our expectation from us as people if we're making disciples or if we're supposed to be gifted as apostles? I think I got that question right. So who wants to give this a shot first?
I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, and then Keith can jump in. So when I first read this question, the first thought that came to my mind is that, the word apostle is one of those tricky words. It means different things to different people, or some people are just not real familiar with it at all. Maybe they see it as a word that existed in the New Testament, but isn't so relevant to us today. So that's the first thing I would say, is that we need to define our terms. We need to understand, what are we talking about with making a distinction between apostles and disciples. But the second thought that came to mind is that, Jesus is our model for disciple making. So I do think that we should look to him and what he did with those first disciples who were sent out as apostles. So that was my first thought, is that we need to understand the word apostle. So in a very brief way, I would say that apostles are those who take a lead role in breaking new ground. Like that was true in the beginning with the 12. They were sent out, which is what the word apostle literally means. So in Mark 3:14, it says that he called his disciples and he selected 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. And he named them apostles. So there is a distinction between the larger group of disciples and this smaller group of 12 who were apostles. So it was not the default, I guess, is what I would want to say there. Not all disciples were apostles. And that was part of the question is, should we be doing what Jesus did with the 12 specifically as apostles? But apostleship is not the default. However, we should follow Jesus, and the way he discipled the 12, I think, is still something that is relevant to us that we should imitate. I do believe that every mature disciple should become a disciple maker, that is the default. So not all of us are going to become apostles where we're going out and breaking new ground. We're not all called and gifted in that way, but we all are called to mature as disciples and become disciple makers, to be part of this mission of making disciples to all nations. So I don't know if you want to add to that or clarify that, Lakeith.
Yeah, I just like the question from Wes. I thought that was a really good question. I think for us, all of us on the Western Hemisphere as believers, we wonder about those things. Like, we want to know, was there a difference between this and this? And I do like that he was saying, we should look to Jesus for those answers. But to me, it's kind of comical because Jesus didn't provide a lot of clarity on titles. I think we care a lot more about titles and names than he does. So it leaves a lot of gray area to be like, are you this or are you that? So I do think that the answer to that question is in the question. So I think looking at Jesus and seeing what he did and how he developed people is going to unlock both, whether you are the disciple or you're the apostle that's sent, like the one that's sent out and that's conquering new ground. And but yeah, I wonder about titles too, man. But you look at Jesus and you're like, man, I don't really see too much here in these gospels about titles. So a lot of room to interpret.
Yeah, it's really, I love that we're doing this question today, because just last night, my kids like to ask really deep theological questions, right before bed, and you're like, you know what? I'm not even going to tell you what the answer is, even though because it's 8:00 and we're going to bed. But my daughter actually asked why there were no women in the 12. And Brett was just like, go to bed. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But it was really, it really kind of got into this sort of topic of we talked about how actually he did have women disciples, but the apostles, because they were going to be heading up and starting the church, needed to be men in that, era and that culture. But it really got into some seriously sticky waters. And I was just like, can you just go to bed instead? Why don't you have these questions over breakfast? I don't know.
That's a good question.
Anyway,
I hate to tell you this, Abigail, but at least in our experience, as the kids move into their teen years, that is when all the deep conversations happen, except it'll be like 11, midnight, 1 a.m. That's when they really want to talk about the deep existential issues of life. So good training there in the Wilson household this week.
I guess I better get some sleep, because the years ahead, there's just more sleep deprivation around the corner. Those of you with babies, just know that it's just going to change, but be the same. So great, optimistic outlook. All right. Hopefully we covered that question. I don't know. Wes can get back to us if we failed, but he can grade us on that. But